We got a call that, hey, the National Enquirer is going to run a negative story against you guys. And it was, Donald is friends with, the president is friends with the guy that runs the National Enquirer. And they said, if you call the president up and you apologize for your coverage, then he will pick up the phone and basically spike the story.
Screw it, let him run it. Just go ahead and run it.
By the way, they ended up running something.
My colleagues at Morning Joe told a harrowing story about the president on Friday, part of their response to Trump's rude tweets about them a day earlier. Well, Trump took to Twitter again after that, of course, to say this. Watched low-rating Morning Joe for first time in a long time. Fake news. He called me to stop National Enquirer article. I said, no, bad show. Meanwhile, the Enquirer promoted that very article at the top of their site on Friday. Here it is. The tabloid then replaced it with this statement, quote, at no time did we threaten either Joe or Mika or their children in connection with our reporting on the story. We have no knowledge of any discussions between the White House and Joe and Mika about our story, and absolutely no involvement in those discussions. And joining me now, MSNBC contributor Gabe Sherman, equal rights attorney and advocate Tamara Holder, and Mother Jones Washington bureau chief David Corn. So Gabe, I want to first start and play the soundbite that is what the National Enquirer was responding to on the question of Joe and Mika and their kids. This is Mika telling the more harrowing part of that story.
And let me explain what they were threatening. They were calling my children. They were calling close friends.
You're talking about the National Enquirer. Yeah.
And they were pinning the story on my ex-husband, who would absolutely never do that. So I knew immediately it was a lie and that they had nothing. And these calls persisted for quite some time.
So I just want to be very clear here.
Wow.
The National Enquirer is harassing your children, your daughters, who are teenagers.
Yeah.
And then the story goes on that essentially someone in the White House is telling Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, if you want this to stop, apologize, beg for forgiveness, and change the way you cover Donald Trump.
Yeah, so I reported this out yesterday, and what I learned was that go-between, the White House official that was unnamed on air, was Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And Joe Scarborough reached out to Jared, my knowledge of these conversations, and said, listen, this has got to stop. And Jared said to the effect, if you want to stop, you got to call the president and apologize. And this is a case, it might seem like inside baseball media gossip. This is actually a really important story because it goes to something you guys talked about in the last block, the win-at-all-costs mentality, and the way Donald Trump will weaponize the media in exchange for trying to change the coverage. This goes to the core of what freedom of the press in this country is about.
Yeah, and David Corn, is this par for the course for the way Jared Kushner operates, let alone Donald Trump?
Well, let's also remember that yesterday Joe said that there were 3 White House, the very top White House guys, who made repeated calls to him. So the story doesn't end, if Joe is accurate, at Jared Kushner. And a lot of the stories out there about Jared Kushner today are that, like, oh, he was trying to do Joe a favor because they're such good friends. So there's a big gap between what the Kushner White House anonymous sources are saying and what Joe told us. And none of this is par for the course. As I wrote yesterday, Joy, this also, if Joe's account is accurate, then you might actually have White House officials breaking the law of New York State against extortion and coercion. I've talked to several criminal defense attorneys, with me and my colleague Dan Friedman yesterday, who said this could be a good case of extortion. So none of this is par for the course. It does reveal a lot about how the White House works and the tweets themselves reveal how Donald Trump's mind seems to function, especially when it comes to blood and women. But it's all, I really do believe this is a serious matter and that Congress ought to, look into this, and that perhaps this is another thing for Special Counsel Robert Mueller to look into.
And Tamara, because the point that it does go to, and is even for something as petty as demanding that a morning show not make fun of your fake Time magazine cover, that demanding that you be nice to him, that is really at the core of what he wants. response. I want to read you, Mika and Joe actually wrote a Washington Post op-ed about this, in which they said he's probably mentally unfit to watch their program because he can't handle it. And they said, we can only hope that the women who are closest to him will follow their examples, or examples of people who criticize him. It will be the height of hypocrisy to claim the mantle of women's empowerment while allowing a family member to continue such abusive conduct. Well, I want to play you some of how the women around Donald Trump have indeed responded to what he did. Here they are.
I think the American people elected somebody who's tough, who's smart, and who's a fighter, and that's Donald Trump. And I don't think that it's a surprise to anybody that he fights fire with fire.
Do you endorse what the president sent out in those tweets?
I endorse the president's right to fight back when he is being mercilessly attacked and when the airwaves are filled with raw sewage about him and his fitness for office.
As the First Lady has stated publicly, when her husband gets attacked, he will punch back 10 times harder.
Kellyanne, as you know, we wouldn't be talking about this morning if the president hadn't sent out those tweets yesterday. There's no way we would be talking.
What do you make of that full-scale defense? Elaine Chao, who's the wife of the Senate Majority Leader, who Donald Trump gave a job to, which is an interesting tactic as well, also defended him. What do you make of the women in Trump's life's response?
I think that the women in Donald Trump's life probably have smaller minds than his small hands, because if they had any decency as women, Joy, you have a father. If your father ever said anything like this about another woman, you would probably grab him by the back of the neck, just like I would to my dad, and say, what are you doing? Apologize. He has continued to surround himself, Donald Trump, with very, very weak-minded women who are afraid of him. We are seeing Donald Trump explode from very, very far away. Imagine the fear that these women have when they're up close and personal with him. You can't fight fire with fire if you're standing right next to it. It's going to explode and you're going to blow up. So this is why he has surrounded himself with women who can't do anything other than defend him, kind of defend him, or just not say anything. And I want to go to one other thing as well. This isn't just Donald Trump's attack on the media. This is Donald Trump now using co-conspirators. That is the National Enquirer, that hopefully doesn't buy the Time magazine, co-conspirators to carry out his crimes, which is blackmail and extortion, and what Gabe and David just talked about.
And, you know, Gabe, the interesting thing about it, too, is it does sort of remind me of kind of the Roger Ailes story, that you have this sort of relationship where, you know, for a long time, a lot of women didn't say anything about his abusive behavior either. But Donald Trump also has a history of using the tabloids to attack his enemies, whether it was calling allegedly his pregnant wife, Melania, at the time, a blimp and a monster for gaining weight during her pregnancy. This was around right after the Access Hollywood tape, planting a story about Ted Cruz in the National Enquirer, a National Enquirer essentially alleging that he was cheating on his wife with multiple women, some of whom worked for Donald Trump. It just goes on and on, even planting allegedly a story about Salma Hayek, the actress, because she wouldn't date him.
No, so, I mean, I reported on this during the campaign. Donald Trump used the National Enquirer as an outlet to dump Oppo research on his rivals like Ben Carson and Ted Cruz. Now, we don't know in this case if he was using the Enquirer personally to go after Joe and Mika, but what we do know is that the owner of the Enquirer, David Pecker, is a close personal friend. And so if he was going after a Trump critic, Trump has that relationship there. And so this is a case where Donald Trump's alliance with the tabloids, he's using an outside group potentially to go after his critics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're out of time. I wish we had more time. But Gabe Sherman, Tamara Holder, and David Korn, thank you guys. And coming up in our next hour,